She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her from the shadows. The hair on the back of her neck stood up as she glanced down the hallway. Was it Mr. King? Or was it something far worse? Something from the broken mirror? The mansion was silent, too silent, and the air was thick with an eerie tension that seemed to settle in the rooms like a heavy fog. The staff had long whispered about their employer's strange behaviour, but no one had ever dared to ask questions. Mr. King, the billionaire who lived in this grand home, had always been a mystery. He had everything anyone could want: wealth, power, and fame, but there was one thing no one could ever figure out. Why had he banned mirrors in his house? It was a rule, simple and clear, one that everyone respected. No mirrors were allowed in any of the rooms, not even the bathrooms. The staff had been trained to adjust the settings to keep everything in place, as though mirrors were a forbidden object, a taboo that no one dared to challenge. People who worked there learned the rule quickly: don't bring mirrors into the house and don't ever try to look for one. Natalie had never been one to break rules. As the newest maid at Mr. King's grand mansion, she had always done her best to fit in. She was quiet, respectful, and determined to prove that she could handle the demanding tasks that came with working for such a wealthy family. But the rule about the mirrors, that rule, made her curious. Why was it so important? Why was it the one rule that everyone seemed to follow without question? The staff had always talked about it in hushed tones, but no one dared to speak too openly about it. They simply knew not to ask questions. Mirrors were not allowed, not a single one. Not in the bedrooms, the bathrooms, or even the corridors. It didn't make sense to Natalie. It wasn't like Mr. King was some eccentric billionaire who lived in a place with no mirrors at all. No. His mansion was full of opulent decor, grand chandeliers, priceless artworks, but not a single reflective surface. The strange rule had become one of the many mysteries of the mansion. What was so dangerous about mirrors? It wasn't just the no mirrors rule that intrigued her. It was Mr. King himself. He was a man of few words, always dressed in dark suits and carrying an air of mystery around him. He never socialized with the staff. He never attended any of the formal dinners or gatherings that his guests enjoyed. He was always distant, as if hiding behind an invisible wall. But today, as Natalie was cleaning the library, something caught her eye, a faint gleam, a sparkle of something hidden behind a thick velvet curtain in the corner of the hall. It wasn't like the usual reflection of polished furniture or brass door handles. It was different. It was a mirror. Her breath caught in her throat. A mirror. A real mirror. Why was it there? Had someone broken the rule? Natalie's hand hovered in front of her face, her fingers trembling slightly. She knew she should leave it alone. She had heard the stories, the rumours whispered in the halls, stories of employees who had dared to break the rule and had either been fired or worse. But the curiosity gnawed at her. What could possibly be so wrong with a mirror? She glanced around the hall, half expecting Mr. King's cold gaze to fall upon her. But there was no one in sight. It was as though the house itself had fallen into a deep silence, waiting for her to make a decision. With a deep breath, she cautiously stepped closer to the curtain, her eyes fixated on the spot where the gleam had appeared. She pushed the thick curtain aside, her heart racing in her chest. There it was, a small, cracked mirror, hidden away like it was some kind of forbidden artifact. The glass was cloudy in places, and the edges were chipped, but it gleamed in the dim light of the hallway as though it had a secret to share. Natalie bent down, her fingers brushing the cold surface of the mirror. Her hand hesitated, unsure if she should lift it. Before she could stop herself, the mirror slipped from its resting place and crashed to the floor with a loud, deafening sound. The shards scattered across the marble floor like jagged pieces of broken dreams. Her heart jumped into her throat, her body frozen in shock. "Oh no!" The sound echoed through the mansion, sending a shiver down her spine. The silence that followed was unnerving, almost suffocating. She quickly glanced around, half expecting to hear Mr. King's footsteps storming down the hall, but there was nothing. Just silence, stillness, the kind of quiet that filled the air with an unsettling weight. And then something happened, something that made Natalie's blood run cold. As she stared at the broken pieces of the mirror scattered across the floor, the reflections in the shards shifted. The pieces of glass didn't just reflect her face or the hallway. No, something was wrong. The shards moved. It was as if the glass had become a window to another world. The first shard she looked at reflected her own face, pale and wide-eyed, staring back at her in confusion. But as she shifted her gaze to another shard, she saw someone. A face. A woman's face. A pale, disfigured face that wasn't hers. The woman had hollow eyes that seemed to stare right into her soul, a twisted, eerie grin stretching across her face. Natalie stepped back, her chest tightening. She couldn't breathe. She blinked. But the face was still there, staring at her, moving. It was like the woman was alive, trapped within the shards of the broken mirror. The reflection in the glass wasn't a reflection at all. It was something much darker. The woman's mouth began to move, though no sound came from her. She was saying something, but Natalie couldn't make out the words. The feeling of dread filled the air, thick and suffocating. Every part of Natalie's body screamed at her to run, to get away, but she couldn't. She was rooted to the spot, transfixed by the sight. Before she could pull herself away, a voice interrupted her trance. "What do you think you're doing?" The voice was cold, commanding, and unmistakable. It was Mr. King. Natalie spun around, her heart leaping in her chest. She had no time to react, no time to explain. She simply stared at him, wide-eyed, her body frozen in fear. Mr. King was standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He didn't look angry, but his eyes were cold, distant, as if he had seen this moment coming from a mile away. He walked slowly toward the broken shards of the mirror, kneeling down with deliberate precision. Natalie could feel her breath quickening, but she couldn't look away. She wanted to say something, apologize, explain, but the words wouldn't come. Her voice was caught in her throat. Mr. King's eyes never left her, as he gently picked up the shards of glass, his fingers moving with eerie calmness. Without a word, he placed the broken pieces back behind the curtain and turned back to her. "You're new here," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You'll learn soon enough why that mirror should never have been touched." Natalie nodded, her hands trembling. She was too stunned to speak, her mind racing. What had just happened? What had she seen in that mirror? But Mr. King wasn't done. He took a step closer to her, his eyes piercing through her. "Consider yourself lucky," he said, his voice cold but controlled. "You don't know what you've just uncovered, but you will, soon enough." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Natalie standing in the hallway, her mind spinning. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the curtain, unable to process what had just occurred. The broken mirror, the woman's face, the eerie smile. What was it all about? Why was Mr. King so determined to keep mirrors away from his house? And what had she just learned that made her life more dangerous than ever? As Natalie returned to her duties, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something had changed. A weight had settled in her chest, and when she looked up, she saw it another mirror, a second one, hidden in plain sight on the far wall of the hallway. It was staring at her, and this time it wasn't cracked. Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The air in the mansion felt heavier than usual, as if the very walls were watching her. She tried to push the thought of the broken mirror from her mind, but it clung to her like a shadow, following her everywhere. The woman's face in the reflection haunted her thoughts, the twisted smile and hollow eyes still fresh in her memory. What did Mr. King mean when he said she didn't know what she'd uncovered? What had she uncovered? And why did the mirror react the way it did? These questions rattled in her mind as she tried to focus on her chores. But the mansion was too quiet, too still. Every creak of the wooden floors beneath her feet, every gust of wind rattling the windows, seemed to amplify the sense of unease that had settled in her chest. It felt as if something or someone was watching her, lurking just out of sight. She couldn't escape the feeling that the mansion held secrets, dark ones, hidden just beneath the surface. Secrets Mr. King was desperate to keep buried. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the second mirror, the one she had spotted earlier, hidden on the far wall of the hallway. It had been there, standing silently, as if waiting for her to notice it. She had walked past it only moments ago, her heart racing in her chest. The mirror hadn't been cracked like the first one. It was whole, perfectly intact, and yet the feeling it gave her was far more chilling. She couldn't explain why, but it seemed as though it was alive, like it was aware of her presence. Shaking off the feeling, Natalie went to the kitchen to help prepare dinner. She could almost hear the faint echoes of her own thoughts in the quiet of the mansion, but she tried to focus on the task at hand. As she chopped vegetables, her mind kept wandering back to the mirror. Was she imagining things? Had she seen something? Or had the stress of her new job simply gotten to her? But then, as she turned to place the knife down, she noticed something odd. The reflection in the kitchen window wasn't right. She stared at the surface for a moment, trying to make sense of it. The reflection of the room seemed off. The light wasn't casting shadows where it should be, and the objects in the reflection appeared distorted. For a moment, the reflection didn't seem like the kitchen at all. It was as if the window was another mirror, one that didn't just reflect reality, but twisted it. The table behind her seemed to stretch unnaturally, the chairs growing longer and thinner, like something out of a nightmare. Her own reflection appeared too still, as though frozen in time. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly turned around, expecting to see the kitchen exactly as it was. But it was the same, nothing out of place. Natalie wiped her forehead, trying to shake off the growing sense of panic. She must have been working too hard. She hadn't slept well in days. The mansion was huge, and it had a way of playing tricks on your mind. Still, she couldn't ignore the unease gnawing at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that someone was just behind her, waiting. The sensation was so strong that she kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see a shadow move across the walls. As she went back to work, the the minutes dragged on. Every noise, every creak of the house made her jump. She felt like she was trapped in some kind of twisted game, where the rules were constantly shifting and the stakes were higher than she could understand. She tried to focus on her tasks, but her mind kept wandering back to the mirror. What was Mr. King hiding? Suddenly, the sharp clang of the phone ringing broke through her thoughts. The sound echoed through the house, jolting her out of her haze. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and ran to the living room, where the phone was sitting on a marble table. "Hello?" she answered, her voice shaking slightly. There was a long pause on the other end. For a moment, she wondered if it was just a prank call. But then the voice came, low and familiar. "It's Mr. King. You've seen it, haven't you?" Natalie froze, the blood draining from her face. How did he know? How could he possibly know? She stood there, stunned, unable to speak. The air around her grew colder, and she felt the chill of dread creep up her spine. The phone felt heavier in her hand. "You've seen the mirrors," Mr. King's voice continued, his tone calm but forceful. "I don't know how, but you've seen them." Natalie wanted to deny it, to say that she hadn't seen anything, that she didn't know what he was talking about. But she couldn't. The truth was undeniable. She had seen the mirrors. She had seen something that was not meant to be seen. "I warned you," Mr. King said, his voice colder now. "I warned all of you. And now you've crossed a line. You don't understand what you've uncovered, but you will. Soon, you'll understand why I had to keep them hidden, why no one can know what's really inside them." The line went dead. Natalie stood there for a long moment, her heart racing. Her hand shook as she held the receiver, staring at the phone like it might bite. She didn't know what to make of the call. Was it a warning? A threat? What had Mr. King meant when he said she didn't understand? The room around her seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching further than they should have. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking behind her. The walls of the mansion felt like they were closing in, the oppressive silence heavier than ever. A sudden thud broke the stillness, coming from the direction of the hallway. Natalie's breath hitched in her throat. Her instinct screamed at her to run, but her feet were rooted to the spot. She slowly turned toward the hallway, the feeling of being watched growing stronger with every passing second. And then she saw it. The second mirror. The one she had walked past earlier. It wasn't the same as before. Something was different. It was no longer reflecting the hallway. It was reflecting her own figure, standing in the kitchen, staring at the phone with wide, frightened eyes. But that wasn't all. In the reflection, something was moving. A shadow, creeping slowly behind her, its edges dark and undefined. It was growing larger, and before she could react, the figure stepped into view. It was the same face she had seen in the shards of the broken mirror. The pale woman, with the hollow eyes and twisted smile. Natalie spun around, her heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just the empty kitchen. The door to the hallway stood ajar, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper in the house. Was it a ghost? Was the mirror playing tricks on her again? Or was something far more sinister going on? She didn't know. But she knew one thing for certain. The mansion was alive, and its secrets were coming for her. The figure in the reflection moved closer, its mouth stretching into a grotesque grin. The shadow was growing darker, swallowing the room. and just as Natalie turned to run, she saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was Mr. King, but his eyes were hollow, empty. Natalie stood frozen, her heart thumping in her chest as she stared at Mr. King. The figure in the reflection was gone, but the weight of the chilling presence still lingered in the air. The room felt heavier, as though the shadows had taken root in every corner, darkening the space until it felt suffocating. Mr. King's face was unreadable as he stood in the doorway, his figure blocking the light from the hallway. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, were now hollow, like black voids that seemed to swallow any warmth in the room. He was still dressed in his usual dark suit, but there was something about him now, something deeply unsettling. His gaze seemed to pierce straight through her, as though he could see every secret she had buried in her heart. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick and uncomfortable, like a storm waiting to break. Natalie's mouth was dry, and her hands trembled as she tried to find the courage to speak. But she couldn't. The fear in her chest felt like a heavy weight, holding her back from saying anything at all. Mr. King took a slow step forward, his footsteps echoing in the silent kitchen. He didn't say anything at first, just watching her with those hollow eyes, as though weighing her every move. The tension in the room grew with every passing second, suffocating her, making her feel as though she were drowning in it. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and cold, like a whisper from the depths of a dark cave. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his eyes never leaving hers. Natalie nodded, though she was unsure of what to say. She didn't know what he meant by it. She didn't know what she had seen in the reflection. But she knew it wasn't normal. It wasn't a trick of the light, and it wasn't her imagination. The face, the twisted woman, she couldn't forget it. The way it had smiled at her, like it knew something she didn't. "You're asking questions that are dangerous," Mr. King continued, his voice still calm, but there was an edge to it now, a threat that she could almost feel in the air. "I told you before, you don't understand what you've uncovered, but you will. And when you do, it might be too late to turn back." Natalie swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. She wanted to ask him so many things to demand answers about the mirrors, about the face she had seen, about the strange things that had been happening since she arrived. But the words wouldn't come. She was too afraid of what he might say, too afraid of the truth that she felt creeping closer, like a dark cloud ready to swallow her whole. "What do you mean?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. King's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was the kind of smile you'd expect from someone who knew a secret that could destroy everything. "You've seen the mirrors," he said again, his voice dropping even lower, as if to make sure no one else could hear. "They're not just reflections, Natalie. They're windows. Windows into another world. A world that's not like ours. A world filled with shadows, whispers, and things you can't even begin to comprehend." Natalie's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know if she believed him, but the chill in the air told her otherwise. The mirrors, windows to another world? It sounded insane. But everything she had witnessed since arriving in this mansion pointed to something unnatural, something otherworldly. "You're lying," she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to stay calm. "Mirrors can't be portals. They're just glass." Mr. King's eyes darkened, and for the briefest moment, Natalie thought she saw something ancient and unsettling pass over his face. "You think you understand," he said, his voice suddenly sharp. "You think it's all just glass and light, but it's not. The mirrors, they connect us to the other side. They allow things to cross over, to come into our world." Natalie felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She didn't know what to make of his words. Was he speaking in riddles? Or was he telling the truth? "You've been seeing things in those mirrors, haven't you?" Mr. King asked, his tone turning darker. "The reflection of the woman? The one with the twisted smile?" Natalie's heart skipped a beat. "How do you know?" she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "I know, because I've seen her too," Mr. King replied, his eyes burning with an intensity that sent a chill through her. "And she's not the only one." Natalie's mind raced. What was he talking about? The woman in the mirror? He had seen her too? And who else was out there, waiting in the shadows of the mirrors? "I told you before," Mr. King said, his voice low and tense. "Once you look into the mirrors, there's no turning back. The things that live in them, the things that cross into our world, they don't forget. And neither will you." For a moment, Natalie was paralyzed with fear, her mind spinning. The face in the mirror had been so real, so vivid. It hadn't been some trick of light. She knew that now. Something from the other side was trying to reach her. Something was trying to drag her into their world. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. She didn't know if she could handle whatever this was. She didn't know if she could live in this mansion anymore, surrounded by things she couldn't explain. Mr. King's lips curled into another cold smile. "There's nothing you can do. You've already seen too much. Now, the mirrors will want you. They'll want to pull you in, to make you one of their own." Natalie took a step back, her body stiff with fear. "No, I won't let that happen." Mr. King's expression softened, but it was a soft cruelty, the kind of look someone might give to an animal they were about to trap. "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The air in the room grew colder, the shadows deepening around them. Suddenly, Natalie heard a faint whispering, like distant voices calling her name from the direction of the hallway. It was faint at first, almost inaudible, but then it grew louder, more insistent. She spun toward the door, her heart racing. The voices, they were coming from the mirrors. She could hear them, even though the mirrors were all still hidden behind the curtains. They were calling her name? "Get away from the mirrors," Mr. King said, his tone suddenly urgent. "They can't be ignored. They never forget." But it was too late. Natalie's eyes locked onto the hallway mirror again. It was like a magnet, pulling her in, drawing her closer despite every instinct screaming at her to turn and run. The whispering was now a cacophony, louder and louder, until it was deafening. And then she saw it. The reflection of the woman, the same pale, twisted faces staring right at her from the mirror, and behind her, in the shadows, something moved, something big, something alive. The figure in the mirror moved, stepping out from the shadows. But as it did, it wasn't the woman in the mirror anymore. It was something far worse. And as Natalie stepped back, the ground beneath her feet trembled, the walls shaking violently. Something was coming, something that would change everything. Natalie's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the mirror. The figure that had once been the twisted woman's reflection was no longer standing alone. Now something else was coming out of the shadows, something that shouldn't have been. The reflection in the glass shifted, warping and twisting, as if the very fabric of reality was tearing itself apart. The woman's face was still there, but now it was joined by another. A dark figure, shrouded in shadows, moved behind her. Its features were obscured, but the shape was unmistakable. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its form was unnaturally stretched. Its outline shimmered, as though it was caught between worlds, unable to fully manifest in either. Natalie's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the weight of the presence in the room growing stronger with every passing second. The whispering voices that had filled the air grew louder until they were no longer whispers. They were screams. Searing, desperate cries that seemed to claw their way into her mind, each one more frantic than the last. "Help! Help me! Help us!" The words were a jumble, impossible to understand, but they were unmistakably urgent. They came from the mirror, from the figure behind the woman, and as Natalie's eyes met the mirror again, she saw something terrifying. The figure wasn't just coming from the shadows, it was coming out of the mirror itself. The glass rippled like water, disturbed by an unseen hand. Natalie's body went cold with fear. The mirror was no longer a reflective surface. It was a doorway. A doorway to a place where the rules of the real world no longer apply. "Mr. King, what is this?" Natalie whispered, her voice shaking. She turned to face him, desperate for an explanation, but he was no longer standing where he had been. The hallway was empty. Her heart skipped a beat. How could he have disappeared so quickly? He had been standing just inches away from her moments ago. Now the room felt even more oppressive, as though it was shrinking around her, pressing in from all sides. The whispering grew louder, almost deafening, but still, Natalie couldn't make out the words. They were too distorted, too frantic. She stumbled backwards, her legs shaking, until her back hit the wall. The mirror was in front of her now, the reflection distorted and shifting with a life of its own. She felt trapped. And then, just when she thought she might collapse from the weight of the fear pressing down on her, the shadow in the mirror moved again. This time, it wasn't just an outline. The figure was fully formed, its face now visible. But it wasn't human. It was something other, something dark, featureless, with eyes that were nothing but black void. The figure's hands, long and thin, reached out toward her, its fingers elongating as if they were stretching to meet her. It was calling to her, its movements slow but deliberate, its fingers growing longer with every second. Natalie's chest tightened, her breath catching in her throat. She tried to move, to run, but her feet felt as though they were glued to the floor. The figure's presence was suffocating, pulling her closer to the mirror with each breath she took. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something else. A movement from the hallway, a flicker of light. For a brief moment, she thought she saw Mr. King standing there, watching her from the shadows. But before she could focus on him, the mirror rippled again, and the reflection changed once more. The figure in the mirror smiled. It wasn't the twisted grin of the woman she had seen earlier. No, this smile was different. It was familiar, too familiar. It was a smile that she had seen before on Mr. King's face. But this time, it wasn't the same. This smile was twisted, hollow. It wasn't the smile of a man in control. It was the smile of someone who had lost everything, someone who had given himself over to something far darker. The reflection of Mr. King in the mirror tilted his head to one side, his eyes empty, voids of darkness that consumed everything around him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Instead, the whispers grew louder, and with them a strange feeling began to creep into Natalie's mind. It was as though the mirror wasn't just showing her the reflection of what was in front of it. It was showing her memories. She saw flashes of Mr. King's past moments she couldn't have known, things she couldn't have understood. There was a young boy sitting alone in a dark room, staring at a mirror that was far too large for his small frame. His eyes were wide, filled with fear and confusion. The mirror in front of him was not reflecting his face, but something else, something that made his heart race and his skin crawl. The boy young Mr. King stared into the mirror, watching as his reflection twisted and contorted into a dark, faceless figure. The figure reached out toward him, its long fingers stretching across the glass like tendrils. He screamed, but no sound came. The mirror swallowed his voice, leaving only silence. Then the scene shifted, and she saw another memory, even darker than the first. Mr. King, older now, standing before the same mirror, his face twisted in horror. But this time, it wasn't just his reflection that had changed. It was him. Natalie's head spun as she tried to piece together what she was seeing. What was happening to him? Why was he looking into the mirror like that? Why was he so terrified? And then, in a final horrifying twist, she saw it. The mirror began to shift. The reflection of Mr. King no longer holding the image of the man she had seen earlier. Instead, it was empty, hollow. And in that emptiness, something dark began to take form. A face, a figure, rising from the reflection. A shadow that had been hidden, waiting for its moment to emerge. The shadow in the reflection smiled again, but it wasn't Mr. King's smile. It was something far darker, a smile that made Natalie's blood run cold. The figure began to emerge from the mirror, its form solidifying as it stepped into the kitchen, its eyes gleaming with hunger. "No," Natalie whispered, backing away, her mind racing. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The figure in the mirror was coming for her. The mirror shattered with a loud crash, the figure stepping fully into the room. But as it did, something unexpected happened. The lights flickered and the temperature dropped sharply. The walls seemed to pulse, and in the silence that followed, a voice, cold and hollow, whispered from the darkness. "Natalie, you're just like him." The shattered mirror lay scattered across the kitchen floor, its jagged edges catching the dim light like razor-sharp teeth. Natalie's breath came in shallow gasps, her heart hammering in her chest. She stumbled backward, her feet slipping on the broken glass, but she couldn't take her eyes off the thing that had emerged from the mirror. The figure stood in the center of the room, tall and shadowy, its form still shifting and pulsing with unnatural energy. Its eyes, those black, hollow voids, stared straight at her, and the air around it seemed to warp and crackle, as though the very fabric of reality was bending under its presence. The whispering voices, now deafening, crawled into her ears, a cacophony of desperate, pleading cries. "Help us! Help her! Help him!" The whispers were like nails on a chalkboard, scratching at her sanity. Her mind felt like it was about to fracture under the weight of the unearthly noise. The figure took a slow step forward, its long fingers reaching out, each movement unnatural, as if it had never known the laws of human existence. It was alive, but not in the way any human should be. It was something else, something ancient, and the fear that filled the room made the air thick and suffocating. "Natalie," The voice was a hiss, a low, venomous whisper that slithered into her mind, bypassing her ears. It felt like the words were carved directly into her soul. She wanted to scream, but the fear locked her voice in place. She could only stand there, frozen, as the thing in front of her began to walk slowly towards her, its movements dragging like a dream she couldn't escape. The lights flickered again, casting the room in shadows, the cold creeping in, wrapping itself around her like a suffocating blanket. Natalie's hands were trembling so badly that she couldn't even feel the coldness of the glass beneath her feet. She tried to take a step back, but her body refused to move. Her legs felt like stone. The figure was coming closer, closer than ever. The reflection in the mirror had been a warning. It had shown her things, horrible things, things she wasn't prepared to understand. And now, standing before her, was the very thing that had been lurking behind the glass, waiting for its chance to break free. Natalie's pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out everything else. The whispers in the room were growing louder, the voices of the damned. It was all happening so quickly, so relentlessly. And then, as if some cruel twist of fate had decided to strike her with one final blow, she heard a voice behind her. "Run!" It was Mr. King. Natalie spun around, her eyes wide, but he wasn't there. The house felt too empty, too still, but his voice had been unmistakable. She knew it had come from inside the house, inside the very walls. He was calling out to her, but it wasn't a warning of safety. It was a call to embrace the darkness. "He's too late," the figure rasped, its voice now a deep, guttural growl that made her skin crawl. "You're already part of this place, Natalie. There is no running. There is no escape." The figure raised one of its elongated hands, its fingers stretching unnaturally long, like tendrils reaching for her. The air felt thick with malice, the weight of its presence crushing her chest. Her mind screamed at her to fight, to run, but every muscle in her body was locked in place. It felt like the world itself had conspired against her, trapping her in this nightmare. And then it spoke again, its voice echoing in her mind. "We are the shadows that hide in your reflection. We are the faces you can't remember, the lives you can't forget. You thought the mirrors were your enemy, but we've been waiting. You've seen us before, and now you'll never be able to unsee us." The figure lunged forward, its arm extending with an unnatural speed, and before Natalie could even react, it grabbed her wrist with its cold, skeletal hand. The contact was freezing, like ice seeping into her very bones. Her breath hitched in her throat as she felt a sharp, unbearable pain race up her arm. The figure was pulling her toward the shattered mirror. Her mind spun in panic. The whispers grew louder, a chaotic mess of tortured voices screaming her name, calling her to join them. "No!" she screamed, finally breaking free from the grip of terror that had bound her. She yanked her arm away, stumbling back, her heart racing in her chest. But the figure only laughed, a low, cruel sound that echoed in the air. "You can't fight it," the voice rasped. "This is what you wanted, remember? You wanted to know what lies beyond the mirror. But now you're part of it." The darkness in the room deepened, the shadows swirling as if alive. Surrounding her, Natalie's mind raced, looking for an escape, but there was no way out. The doors were locked. The windows were barred. There was only one place left, the mirror. And suddenly, in a terrifying moment of clarity, she understood what had happened. The mirrors weren't just windows to another world. They were portals, portals that trapped souls, souls of those who dared to look too closely, who were curious enough to see beyond the reflection. and she had been one of them. Mr. King had warned her. He had tried to keep her from looking too closely, but now she was trapped in this hellish game. And the figure, the thing that had once been hidden behind the glass, was ready to claim her. "You're mine now," it hissed, its fingers reaching for her once more. This time, there was no escaping. She had crossed the threshold, and now there was no return. The mirror shimmered, and for a fleeting moment, Natalie saw herself in the reflection, but it wasn't her. It was a twisted, distorted version of herself, standing in the shadows, her eyes hollow, her smile stretched wide and cruel. The reflection grinned back at her, mocking her helplessness. In that moment, she realized the truth. The mirrors were not just reflections of reality, they were reflections of what could have been, what could have consumed them. And now she was becoming part of it, a part of the never-ending darkness behind the glass. The figure reached out, pulling her into the broken glass, and as her body was consumed by the cold, sharp shards, her last thought was clear. This was only the beginning. As Natalie was pulled into the mirror, her body breaking apart in the cold reflection, the glass began to crack again. A dark shadow began to move behind the shattered pieces. Was it another soul, trapped in the mirror like hers? Or was it something else? The question is, will you dare look into the mirror yourself? Will you survive the curse of the mirror? Please subscribe, like, share, and comment where you're watching from. Tell me if you'd like me to continue the story.